The fiercest war you will ever fight will not be against another nation, another army, or even another person. It will be against yourself. Every war on the outside, between families, communities, or nations, begins as a fracture within the human soul. Carl Jung believed that the true battlefield is always internal, the clash between who we think we are and the parts of ourselves we cannot accept. Have you ever noticed how two voices live inside you? One urging you forward, the other pulling you back, one calling you to grow, the other whispering fear. At times, it feels as if an invisible war rages in the silence of your mind, between desire and duty, love and resentment, faith and doubt. This is not a metaphor. It is the most real conflict of all, and its casualties are trust, peace, and wholeness. Jung called this conflict the struggle with the shadow, the hidden parts of our personality that we deny, suppress, or despise. We pretend the shadow is not ours, but it never disappears. It fights us from within until we finally acknowledge it. And when we refuse to face it, the war spills outward, staining our relationships, our communities, even our politics. The wars we see on the news are only echoes of this inner divide. So if you are searching for peace, do not look only to the world outside. Begin by asking, what war is raging in me? What enemy am I carrying within? Because only by confronting the battlefield of the soul can we ever hope to end the wars beyond it. Every war begins with a fracture, and the most devastating fracture happens within the self. Jung often said that people are not masters in their own houses. The conscious mind, the I that we proudly display to the world, believes it is in control. Yet beneath it lies an entire kingdom of forces, desires, fears, and memories we cannot fully command. When these hidden forces rise, we feel as if we are torn apart, pulled in opposite directions by hands we cannot see. This is the root of the inner war. We are divided against ourselves. Think of the times you wanted something passionately, but another part of you whispered, no, you can't. The moment you longed for love, but shame held you back. The nights you dreamed of freedom, yet fear chained you to the familiar. These are not small hesitations. They are echoes of a deeper division in the psyche. The conflict between desire and duty, between instinct and morality, is as old as humanity itself. Ancient myths and sacred stories tell of gods at war, heroes caught between loyalty and temptation, angels and demons battling for the human soul. Jung saw in these myths a mirror of our psychological reality. At the heart of this division is what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything we do not wish to see in ourselves. It is the anger we deny, the envy we bury, the weakness we hide. But repression does not destroy these forces. It only drives them deeper. The shadow becomes a soldier in the dark, gathering strength in silence, waiting for the moment to erupt. And when it does, it can consume us entirely. Imagine a man who prides himself on being gentle and kind. He represses every spark of anger, telling himself he is above conflict. But inside, his shadow grows restless. One day, a trivial argument ignites it, and he explodes in violence, shocking even himself. He becomes the very thing he denied. Or think of a woman who values control above all. She hides her vulnerability, her need for affection, because she sees them as weakness. But over time, loneliness poisons her heart, and she lashes out in bitterness at those who try to love her. The war within always finds a way to break into the world. Outside, the roots of inner war also lie in the tension between the ego and the self. The ego is the small circle of consciousness that says, "This is me." The self, in Jung's language, is the larger wholeness of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and dark. The ego wants order, clarity, mastery, but the self demands integration. When the ego resists, refusing to see what lies in the dark, the self pushes back, creating dreams, symptoms, and crises to force our attention. The war is not punishment. It is a cry for wholeness. We can see this in our own everyday struggles. When you feel guilty for no clear reason, it may be the self reminding you of what you have pushed aside. When anxiety grips you, it may be the inner voice warning that something essential has been ignored. These inner battles may not involve weapons, but their wounds are real. Sleepless nights, broken relationships, and a soul that feels estranged from itself. Jung often compared the psyche to a house. The ego lives in one brightly lit room, furnished with all that is socially acceptable. But behind locked doors lie the other rooms, messy, dark, full of forgotten furniture and strange whispers. To live only in the one room of the ego is to live in illusion. Sooner or later, the neglected rooms will force themselves open. When they do, we feel invaded, as if strangers have broken in. But they were never strangers. They were always part of us. The greatest wars of history, wars of nations, tribes, ideologies, have their seed in these neglected rooms of the psyche. When a society represses its shadow, it projects it outward. The aggression it refuses to see in itself, it begins to see in its neighbor. The hatred it denies becomes embodied in the enemy. What is true for nations is first true for individuals. The war begins within. To understand the roots of inner war is to recognize that peace will never come from denial or repression. Peace comes only when we are willing to descend into those hidden rooms, to look at the faces of the parts of ourselves we fear. This is not easy. It is terrifying. But Jung reminds us that what we resist will persist, and what we confront with honesty can be transformed. The roots of inner war are not proof that we are broken beyond repair. They are proof that the human soul is vast, containing contradictions and opposites. The war is a sign that we are not yet whole, but wholeness is possible. The very conflict that torments us is also the invitation to integrate, to grow, to embrace a deeper truth about ourselves. So when you feel torn between voices, when you feel that invisible war raging in your heart, remember, you are not failing. You are being called. The battle is the beginning of transformation. And only by understanding its roots can you hope to move toward peace. The deepest suffering in life does not come from what others do to us, but from what we do to ourselves when we are divided inside. Jung saw that the psyche, when it refuses wholeness, begins to fracture. The human being becomes two, the mask we show to the world and the hidden self buried beneath it. This is the moment when the inner war turns into a civil war of the soul. We all know this division intimately. Outwardly, we smile, nod, and carry on. Inwardly, another voice whispers, "This is not who you are." Outwardly, we say yes to expectations, to family roles, to cultural rules. Inwardly, we long to scream no. Jung described this split as the conflict between the persona, the mask created to adapt to society, and the shadow and deeper self, which hold the truths we have denied. This split is not benign. It creates a constant tension, like a rope pulled too tightly. The conscious ego insists on maintaining control, clinging to its identity. But the unconscious rebels. It refuses to be silenced. Dreams begin to betray us. Symptoms of anxiety, depression, or compulsion emerge. Relationships crack under the strain of our dishonesty. The soul itself becomes a battlefield where each side accuses the other of betrayal. Think of the person who builds their life on perfection. Their persona is flawless, successful, polite, admired. But behind the mask lies exhaustion, resentment, and the terror of being seen as human. Every smile they force is another bullet fired in the war against their own heart. Eventually, the mask collapses, and the hidden self bursts forth in breakdown, scandal, or rage. What looked like a sudden disaster was, in truth, a war years in the making. Or consider the person who identifies only with strength. They never allow weakness, never admit fear. Their persona says, "I am unshakable." But in the secret corners of the psyche, fear multiplies. Vulnerability becomes the enemy. The person begins to attack in others the very qualities they cannot bear in themselves. What they reject inside, they fight outside. The war within creates wars without. This splitting of the soul can be subtle. Sometimes it is nothing more than the quiet feeling that you are living someone else's life. You sit at the dinner table, nodding through conversations, but deep inside, you know you are absent from your own existence. Other times, it is a violent inner clash that spills into addiction, self-sabotage, or destructive choices. In both cases, the essence is the same. You have been torn in two, and the halves no longer recognize each other. Jung was clear. This split is not a flaw to be eliminated. It is a call to integration. The conflict between persona and shadow, ego and self, is painful because it points to something larger, the human need to become whole. We cannot silence one side of the soul without destroying our vitality. We must learn to hold the opposites, to bring the hidden into the light, and to reconcile the parts we thought were irreconcilable. Yet, most people run from this task. They numb the conflict with distractions, bury it in work, or cover it with superficial positivity. But the war never stops. It leaks into the way they treat their children, the way they vote, the way they love, the way they dream. The split soul cannot find peace, and until reconciliation begins, every gesture of life carries the bitterness of unfinished war. Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." What he meant was that the war within us, if unresolved, becomes an inheritance. Children sense the unspoken division in their parents. They grow up carrying the anger, the shame, or the silence that their parents refuse to face. The inner war never stays locked. Inside, it is passed like a torch, burning through generations. This is why Jung insisted that the work of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, is not a luxury. It is a moral responsibility. If we do not heal the split in our own souls, we condemn others to fight our battles for us. The wars of the world are nothing more than the accumulation of countless unhealed inner wars. So when the soul splits in two, the question is not whether you will suffer, but how you will respond. Will you deny it, pushing the shadow further down, letting it grow monstrous in the dark? Or will you face it, trembling but honest, and begin the long work of integration? This choice determines not only your peace, but the peace of everyone around you. The fiercest wars are not fought with guns, but with silence. They are not won with victories, but with reconciliation. And the first reconciliation must happen here in the secret battlefield of your own divided soul. Every war leaves scars, and the war within is no different. But unlike battles fought with weapons, the wounds of inner war are often invisible. They bleed in silence, shaping the way we think, love, and love. Jung believed that when we do not confront the split within, the consequences ripple outward from the private chambers of the heart to the very fabric of society. The first casualty of inner war is peace of mind. When you are at war with yourself, no achievement, no possession, no relationship can bring true rest. You may lie down at night in a comfortable bed, but your mind continues to march in battle formation, replaying regrets, fighting unseen enemies, carrying guilt like a shield you cannot put down. Sleep becomes a negotiation, not a refuge. Even moments of joy are clouded, because the divided soul whispers, "You don't deserve this." The second casualty is authenticity. When the war inside rages, we construct masks to hide the chaos. We present a cheerful face while resentment coils beneath it. We project confidence while fear gnaws at us. We pretend to be moral while secretly indulging in what we condemn. The more convincing the mask, the deeper the fracture becomes. Eventually, we no longer know which part is real, the face we show the world or the voice we bury in the dark. This lack of authenticity poisons relationships. Jung observed that the conflicts people cannot face within themselves are inevitably projected onto others. A man at war with his own anger accuses everyone else of hostility. A woman who suppresses her envy constantly sees betrayal in her friends. In this way, the private battle turns into a public one. Families fracture, friendships collapse, communities split, not because the external issues are insurmountable, but because the unresolved shadow demands an enemy. Think of the father, who has never reconciled with his own weakness. He insists on strength, control, and perfection, not only for himself, but for his children. His inner war becomes their prison. The daughter learns to fear vulnerability. The son grows resentful of impossible expectations. Or imagine the mother, who hides her unspoken bitterness. She tells herself she is sacrificing for her family, but in reality, her unacknowledged anger seeps into every word, every silence. The home becomes a battlefield, even without raised voices. These are not isolated tragedies. They accumulate, creating cultures of division. Jung warned that what individuals repress, societies eventually enact. The aggression denied by one generation becomes the violence of the next. When enough individuals fail to integrate their shadows, entire nations split into hostile camps, each side convinced that the enemy is out there. Political polarization, religious intolerance, racial hatred, all of these are fueled by the same psychological mechanism: projection of the inner. Enemy onto the outer world. History is a testament to this truth. Totalitarian movements rise not merely from ideology, but from collective shadows. When a society refuses to face its greed, it projects corruption onto scapegoats. When it denies its own violence, it seeks enemies of the people to destroy. Jung saw in the horrors of the 20th century the catastrophic consequences of inner wars unacknowledged. Auschwitz and Hiroshima were not born overnight. They were the eruption of shadows buried for generations. On a more intimate scale, the consequences of inner war are just as devastating. Unacknowledged conflict manifests in the body as illness, in the mind as neurosis, in the soul as despair. Depression can be seen as the ego crushed between warring forces it cannot reconcile. Addiction often reflects an attempt to silence the battlefield through chemical numbness. Even chronic anxiety can be understood as the soul's alarm warning that something vital has been buried alive. But perhaps the most tragic consequence of inner war is the loss of potential. A divided soul cannot create fully, cannot love fully, cannot live fully. The energy that could have been used to write, to build, to love, to dream, is consumed by the endless conflict within. Life shrinks into survival. The great destiny of the self is postponed indefinitely, as the ego spends all its strength defending its fragile walls against the forces it fears. And yet, Jung insisted these consequences are not inevitable. They are warnings. The anxiety, the conflict, the projections, all of these are signals that the psyche is demanding wholeness. Inner war is not a meaningless torment. It is a summons. The soul does not wish to destroy itself. It wishes to heal. But healing requires courage. The courage to see, to admit, to embrace the parts of ourselves we have treated as enemies. If we ignore this call, the war grows louder. If we answer it, the war can become the very path to peace. Jung saw countless patients whose symptoms were unbearable until they understood them as messages. Nightmares turned into guides. Depression revealed neglected truths. Anxiety became the doorway to transformation. What had once been unbearable became meaningful. The consequences of inner war are tragic, but they also hold the seed of redemption. For the soul, unlike the battlefield of nations, does not seek annihilation. It seeks reunion. The enemies within us are not strangers. They are our own forgotten children, waiting to be welcomed home. So the question is not whether you will face the consequences of inner war. The question is whether you will let those consequences destroy you, or allow them to lead you toward a deeper peace. Because every wound of the soul carries within it the possibility of wisdom, and every conflict is secretly an invitation to wholeness. If the fiercest war we ever fight is within ourselves, then the noblest victory is not conquest, but reconciliation. Jung never promised that this path was easy. He warned that to make peace inside is to enter the very darkness we fear. But he also showed that the only way to end the war is not to destroy one side of ourselves, but to bring both sides into dialogue. Inner peace is not silence imposed by force. It is harmony discovered through understanding. The descent into the shadow, the first step toward peace, is courage. The courage to look at what we have denied. The shadow, the hidden reservoir of all we reject in ourselves, must be faced. This is terrifying, because the shadow is not only full of negative traits like anger, envy, greed, or fear. It also contains unlived potential, creativity, tenderness, boldness that we were too afraid to claim. Facing the shadow is like entering a cave. At first, all we see is darkness, but as our eyes adjust, treasures glimmer in the walls. Jung suggested that dreams are often the doorway to this cave. Nightmares that once seemed cruel or meaningless can reveal the shadow's face. A terrifying figure in a dream might symbolize not a literal threat, but the part of ourselves we have exiled. The moment we listen, rather than flee, we discover that the shadow is not a monster, but a messenger. Consider the person who always avoids conflict. Their dreams may show them being chased by an aggressor. If they dare to face that aggressor, they may discover their own capacity for healthy anger, a force that can protect rather than destroy. Or take the person who suppresses vulnerability. Their nightmares may depict floods or broken homes. To explore these symbols is to acknowledge the hidden truth, that their heart longs to be held, not armored. The shadow reveals what we need. To reclaim dialogue between opposites, the second step is dialogue. Jung believed that inner peace comes when we allow the conflicting parts of ourselves to speak to one another. Instead of silencing the voice of fear, we ask it what it wants. Instead of denying anger, we inquire where it comes from. Instead of pushing away sadness, we sit beside it like a companion. This dialogue can be cultivated through active imagination, a practice Jung himself developed. In this method, one sits quietly and allows the figures of the unconscious to appear in the mind's eye. You might see an angry child, a wise elder, a dark animal, or a wounded figure. Rather than banishing them, you converse with them. You listen. You allow them to teach you. In time, these inner figures reveal their purpose. The angry child may say, "I wanted someone to protect me." The dark animal may say, "I hold your instinct, your raw life force." The wounded figure may whisper, "Stop pretending you are not in pain." When we hear them, the war softens. The enemies of the soul reveal themselves as guardians of forgotten truths, holding the tension of opposites. Inner peace is not about choosing one side over the other. It is about holding both. Jung called this the tension of opposites. For example, you may long for freedom yet crave security. The ego wants clarity, while the self embraces paradox. Instead of forcing a choice, Jung encouraged us to hold the tension, to live in the discomfort until a new, larger truth emerges. This is alchemy of the psyche, when fire and water, light and dark, good and evil, are held together, they create a new form of being. Out of the war comes a synthesis, something more whole than either side alone. Inner peace is not a fragile truce, but a transformation of the battlefield itself. Love as integration, perhaps the most radical teaching of Jung, is that love is the secret to ending the inner war. Not sentimental love, not romantic love, but the fierce, unconditional love that dares to embrace what seems unworthy. To love the shadow is to say, even this part of me belongs. Even this anger, this fear, this brokenness has a place in my house. This does not mean indulging every impulse or excusing harm. It means recognizing that these forces are part of our wholeness, and they can be transformed when acknowledged. What we hate in ourselves remains our jailer. What we love, even if imperfectly, becomes our ally. From inner peace to outer peace, Jung insisted that the path to inner peace is not selfish. On the contrary, it is the only way to heal the world. When we reconcile our inner divisions, we no longer need to project them onto others. The enemy ceases to be out there because we have faced it in here. Families become less burdened by inherited wounds. Communities become freer of scapegoats. Nations become less prone to hatred that imagine a world where leaders had made peace with their own shadows, where parents raised children not from unhealed wounds, but from integrated strength, where friends forgave differences because they had forgiven themselves. The wars of the world might not vanish overnight, but their fuel would be gone. The inner war, when resolved, disarms the outer one. The ongoing work But we must be clear. Inner peace is not a final achievement. It is an ongoing work. The psyche is alive, dynamic, always revealing new layers. Integration is a process, not a destination. There will be days when the old war flares up again. But once we have begun the work, we know the path. We know that the answer is not repression, but dialogue. Not hatred, but love. Not avoidance, but courage. This ongoing work is the path of individuation. It is the slow, lifelong journey toward becoming whole, toward embodying the self rather than being enslaved by the ego. The reward is not perfection, but authenticity. Not control, but harmony. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of meaning. The wars of the world are tragic, but the war within is the fiercest of all. Jung reminds us that every scream of hatred, every act of violence, every conflict on the outside is only the echo of a deeper unrest inside the human soul. If we wish to end the wars we see in families, communities, and nations, we must first dare to end the war within ourselves. That peace does not begin in treaties or speeches. It begins in silence. The silence where we finally face the shadow we have exiled, the voice we have silenced, the wound we have ignored. When we embrace these forgotten parts of ourselves, the battlefield transforms. What once was enemy becomes teacher. What once was conflict becomes meaning. And from that inner reconciliation flows a new strength, a new compassion, a new way of living. This is not easy work, but it is the most important work you will ever do. Because when you make peace inside, you become a bearer of peace outside. You stop projecting enemies and start creating understanding. You stop wounding and start healing. In you, the endless cycle of war begins to break down. So let me ask you, what war is raging inside you right now? And what would it mean not to win it, but to reconcile it? If this message touched you, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking together on this journey of Jung's wisdom. And please share your struggles, your battles, and your victories in the comments below. I read them all, and I will meet you there, not with judgment, but with empathy, because none of us fights alone.